So I'm delighted to be joined by Bill Bilson, who is the head of conservation at Reclusia. We're going to be talking a little bit about your career, where you got to at the moment, Bill, and then we've got some questions. I've got some questions for you, um, really about advice that you would give, decisions that people make about their career in this particular field. But I'm going to start by asking you just to tell us a little bit more about who you are, what you do, and your work currently.
Yeah, so I'm head of conservation of I'd say a small to medium conservation practice, private conservation practice. That we've got in-house specialisms in masonry conservation, timber conservation, and we've got 2 stained glass studios. So a sort of a range of expertise in the team. And our focus when our MD founded the company was very much ecclesiastical context and architecture. Hence, we felt that a interdisciplinary team was like the key element needed because of the interfaces when you're working with, say, a church window or the likes. And then we've kind of grown from there into a sort of more specialist conservation practice, like a few in the country. We came together at a point when it was useful for his company, but also I was looking for a change and looking to broaden my expertise because originally I studied architecture at the Glasgow School of Art. So I'd started on that sort of path, and I'd always been interested in the built environment. I'd always been interested in how we can create nice spaces and places. But as I studied my first part of architecture and then moved into my part 1, I kind of started discovering that my passion had always kind of really lain with the historic built environment. And it was those aspects that I kind of wanted to explore more as I moved through. So I didn't necessarily have a set plan per se. I kind of moved around various things. But in my day-to-day now at Reclusia, I kind of oversee all of the conservation aspects of the company. So I kind of have an overarching responsibility. I do some active project management. That's more sort of when something is particularly technical. So we literally this week started a project in the centre of Chester where it's to do with some structural stabilisation works of a whole east gable of a church. And we did some temporary stabilisation works a few years ago, and then now we're doing a permanent system. And because of the technical element, I'm there pretty much every day, actively monitoring and managing the work. But typically I'm office based. I'm overarching and checking that we're doing things correctly. I'm guiding the team as to what policies they should be following or what best practice guidance they should be doing. So I kind of wear multiple hats, really.
And I'll confess to the people watching this that we've chatted about this already, and one of the things that we talked about was, and you've just mentioned it, setting out along the path of architecture, and then pivoting and moving into the MST at Cambridge, and deciding to go into that sort of area of building conservation. How did that come about? You said it was a kind of a realization that that's where you wanted to be. Tell me a little bit more about that experience.
It's one where I think I find in my professional practice now, but also in any lecturing I do and other organizations that I work with in sort of more volunteer capacity, that often people I come across didn't intend to be where they are. And actually having a set plan is a great thing, but being willing to divert off that and take an opportunity or realize that something's not necessarily your preferred route or aspect like that. So with architecture, as I say, I'd always enjoyed the built environment. I'd always enjoyed architecture and the thought of it. But once I was then doing it, understanding that actually I had a more nuanced view and I had a more specific area that I kind of wanted to look at. So I applied for the MST in building history because of its sort of more interdisciplinary approach and understanding, but also because it fitted with that more historic environment that I understood that I was becoming more interested in, and that's where I'd kind of wanted to explore. I didn't actually think I was necessarily going to be able to get onto the MST. So it was very much I will apply for that. If I get onto it, fantastic. If not, I will continue down the path that I was still working on. So I was going to go back to the Glasgow School of Art and continue doing my part two. Amazingly and fortunately, I did get onto the MST, and then that kind of made me quickly reassess things and react to, it was a part-time course, so I needed a part-time job, partly to help fund the course, and so I just started looking anywhere I could for any position I could that was in any way related to the historic built environment or conservation or heritage practice, but I didn't pigeonhole myself. I think one thing I'd learned trying to find my part one, that you were forcibly pigeonholed, and it was a very difficult process, therefore. So I was kind of open to any possibilities I could. So I applied for an estimator's job with a conservation firm that worked all over the country, but their main specialism was metal conservation. So again, none of these things had I had that set experience, and I would necessarily have thought, yes, that's what I want to do. But fortunately, they saw in me and I saw in them that this was an opportunity for me to grow and for me to develop, and I could learn the process of being an estimator, but ultimately aim to be going somewhere else. But it was my foot in the door at that point. So none of it was a planned route. It was very fluid, and it was quite a big decision, actually, to not continue architecture, because I still had a passion for it. I still do today, but it was just being open to that idea that there are other things that might be more suited, and being willing to try them out in some ways.
And that sort of sideways move going into the estimator role, which you say was, it was more to do with, I need something to do to support this course. What did that sideways move kind of give you in then sort of taking the MST and that experience to the next stage?
So that move, again, so whilst they were they were probably the biggest and main metal conservation firm in the UK at the time, they were still quite small. So it meant I was joining quite a small team and working directly with the owners and the directors to cost up projects. And again, because they'd sort of understood that I was going on to the MST, I had an architecture background. They saw that I had other understanding and knowledge that could be applied to how to assess a project, how to then manage a project. So it was that way of very quickly opening me up to the conservation sector and experience that I might not otherwise have had if I'd tried to, say, been firm in the idea that I wanted to be a heritage consultant with an architecture firm. Again, there's a lot of people going for very few jobs at points, so it's a very competitive field in a good way, but also sometimes in a barring way to some people, but also a very narrow field, and you're not necessarily exposed to the same levels. You might be a small fish in a very large pond, whereas going my side route into the estimating, I was kind of a medium fish in a small pond, and it was a really good exposure to different approaches that I then was brilliantly able to sort of interweave what we were learning on the MST into my professional practice. The MST incorporated needing to do various placement type notions, but again, because of my position and because of what I was able to do, I didn't need to do that. I could do those placement type options with that company, and because the course required them, I was able to negotiate being able to do different aspects of work that better suited the placement, ticking the right boxes within the company. So again, it meant that I could sort of mold my own role, and they were very open to that. And I think most organizations are open to that, actually. I've never worked with or known organizations that don't actually like encouraging their employees to engage in education, engage in upskilling themselves in some way, shape or form, because it's useful for the company to be able to have people who are doing that. So it's something that I know at Reclesia we're very keen to enable employees to upskill both themselves, but we will also give them opportunities as well. And it's all a mutually beneficial approach.
And so really at the heart of that is the idea of keeping an open mind in terms of which paths are open to you and where they can potentially take you. We were talking earlier about this idea of planned happenstance and putting yourself proactively into situations that might open up other opportunities. That leads on to the other things that you do when you're not working. So you're involved as a board member, and you've got fingers in lots of pies. Tell us a bit more about why you get involved and in this kind of work, voluntary work, and I guess what that gives you in terms of the wider perspective.
Yeah. So sometimes I sort of think I have a problem of saying yes to things, but actually, the older I get, the more I realize that's not a bad thing, and that is something that anyone, both at university or in their early career, really should be trying to say yes to things and put themselves out there, because it can open up a lot of learning opportunities that then help your career, but also there's still a nicety and community that you can end up creating. So I think when I was about 23, 24, I applied for a trustee role with a small charity called Arvon, which is a writing charity. So again, not something I necessarily have or didn't feel I had an affinity with writing, but I'd had this interest in some ways with poetry because my final degree sort of project for the Glasgow School of Art was a writer's retreat. So I'd had this little notion, but I'd sort of seen that in this opportunity of applying to be a trustee that was for a property specialist kind of position on the board, a learning element within governance that at that point in my career, I wouldn't otherwise have had the opportunity to be engaging with that level of governance and legal and moral responsibility in many ways. So being able to somehow be seen as acceptable to join the board, they did take a punt having a young 23-year-old join the board, but it was a huge learning exercise and opportunity that had I not put myself out there, I obviously wouldn't have gained that. But the ideas I could learn from that organization and bring back into my career, I'd say were invaluable in my development. And I'd like to think that my past employers, but also my current employers, that it's brought a level of experience that, again, I might not otherwise have had, or our teams wouldn't otherwise have had. So it's something that definitely students and early career people should look at these things, because it just opens up at different avenues that you might not have realized. And with something like Arvon, as I said, there's also those opportunities for a different community. So sometimes you can you basically have work and you have home kind of ideas, or you have university and you have home, whereas actually exploring other communities can both benefit yourself in a mental health capacity or in a mindfulness type approach, but also it can enable connections that you wouldn't otherwise have had, that themselves could open up different career avenues or positions that otherwise might be so competitive you wouldn't necessarily be seen amongst the trees kind of notion. So like I know with Arvon, I got to engage with, we hired a properties manager who was a top sort of property and building specialist at the time. She'd just finished her role as the president of the CIOB. So again, had I not been doing that role, I would unlikely have engaged with someone at that level in their career, where she was very much at the top of her career and remains so, and a very big name that actually the opportunity was given to me to be able to engage with her in a way that I would never have had. So again, that's where I look at joining different organizations, engaging with different organizations. So it's something that I've done more and more as I've got older. But again, I think students should really look at joining the likes of Icon or Reba or whatever it might be that they want and they're interested in, and attend online talks. The wonderful thing since COVID is the more and more talks are now online, so they're more and more accessible. And in those instances, you can then meet more people, see other ideas, find other avenues that then might mean your career plan ends up more fluid than you'd originally perceived. So like last year, I became a fellow of the International Institute of Conservation, and again, trying to engage with them and their early careers committee and the likes to try and encourage people to do these different things. And because often people don't necessarily know that these things exist, when people are studying architecture, they know about the RIBA and they're always encouraged to look at that. But actually the other sort of groups and bodies that exist around the architecture and built environment world aren't necessarily as known and definitely not as explored. And people really should.
It's interesting. I wonder. So you're a real advocate for that idea of developing that wider knowledge. I've got an image in my head of sort of almost like a spider's web and kind of colouring in different segments as you get involved in more and more things. So you're building up this picture. Maybe painting by numbers might be a better visual image to use, but that sense of really reaching out and being open to being involved in organizations or speaking to people or going to events, those sorts of things. Did you do that so much as a student? Did it take a did it take a while for you to...
I will always admit that I didn't embrace these things as much as I would now think I should have done. Again, partly because I didn't necessarily know about it, and actually I don't feel that many people were saying these things. They might have been, and I might not have been listening fully. But it is something that I think if I was to look back and look at how I might change some of my or add to some of my choices, it would be looking at engaging with these things earlier, to open up my mind to different avenues in a more broad collaborative way that I don't think I would have necessarily had. I feel like I've got there, but I might have got there slightly quicker, or I might have got there in a different manner. And it's something that I think it really builds on people's understanding. So you can then start noting, especially in a university context, you can note your learning in practical senses that you might not otherwise get to. And you'd be open to more case studies and more ideas that again fit back to your learning, but you're not being exposed to them otherwise through the set reading or the set learning that you're being told to look at.
And as you say, I mean, the transformational change since COVID is that so much more of this initial, at least, networking is available online. There's more access to actually participate than just 5 years ago. I mean, it's amazing just how much that has changed.
Yeah, because like the ISC last year, we had the Congress was in Lima, and obviously that isn't open to everybody, but because everything was able to be online as well, so I helped chair and lead a special Europe hub. So it was myself and a few other fellows and top conservators within the IIC, hosting discussions with the speakers that we'd sort of filtered through to find which ones we thought would be more interesting to our hub. But it was that process that, again, pre-COVID, actually they weren't able to do that, and they weren't considering to do things like that. And suddenly it opens up this field where I've started getting more ideas from Greek conservators and Nordic-based conservators, and then I've now connected with various Indian conservators and the likes, and it suddenly broadens your understanding and appreciation of all these things.
And I guess also, I think we forget how many professional associations actually have discounted membership for students, and they are far more accessible. And just because you're not necessarily wearing that cloak yet, that kind of professional identity, you are still allowed at the party. And so encouraging people just to kind of get out there and see what they can learn and gain from engaging in that sort of way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Carrying on with this sort of career side of things. So one of the things that you said that you would probably do differently is more of this engaging more widely. For people who are entering your profession, what are the big changes that you're seeing? What's on the horizon? Good, bad, just things that people really need to be aware of, and are there things that they can do to strengthen their knowledge and therefore their job applications when the time comes?
Yeah, and I think, as everyone would probably expect, notions of sustainability, both in architecture but in what I also lecture on in terms of craftsmanship and heritage practice, is a big thing, but is also a growing thing. So it's something that a lot of courses are reassessing themselves and checking that they're keeping up to date in all of this front, and embracing notions of sustainability is quite an important one in my view, and will become ever more important. So trying to get on to things like carbon literacy type training or various other aspects like that might help broaden your understanding of what these different notions and needs are. Again, it's things like that would probably set you apart in a CV sense, or in your own learning. Another aspect especially within my practice and actual active conservation and building projects, social value is a huge aspect nowadays, that I think has always been there, but not necessarily in a very set termed name, and approach, but understanding how your projects might engage with communities better, how you can pass on learning, how you can develop financial benefits to communities. Again, understanding some of the social value aspects might better open you up, especially from an architecture point of view, into part 1 positions or part 2 positions, especially once you're going into your part 3 and you need to be a project-based architect and actually actively running a project, knowing what social value aspects a main contractor might need to be achieving for your client, actually, and understanding how that could be broadened out. Suddenly it can be a much more collaborative approach, because again, I've sometimes in various projects, both as a subcontractor or a main contractor, I've seen that the social value has been a tick boxing exercise. People have just gone through the motions. In other senses, it's been that the main contractors had very set ideas, but then similarly an architect might have had and they're not working together on these things. So again, trying to bring that all together is quite a key one. Understanding within the sustainability idea, understanding materiality. Again, I always tie back to my craftsmanship idea, that it's understanding the more vernacular. It's a big thing on the MST in terms of building history, really understanding the historic vernacular, but actually understanding bits like that for an architect student or an early careers person really can be informative to their architectural practice. So understanding materialities of different contexts, which I appreciate people are taught. I was taught it on my architecture degree, but sometimes you don't necessarily get the nuances in terms of different quarried stones, that actually very local contexts can have very different vernacular results. But also the sustainability tied to that in terms of utilizing these sources correctly and in a fair and equitable manner. So again, you don't want to be doing a big project using all the local stone, and meaning that a nice old historic church can't conserve themselves with that local stone anymore if you've utilized that resource. So sustainable management of resources is quite a big key thing in my head, but I think a lot of architecture students are getting that, but it will just grow and grow and grow.
But again, what you're doing there is you're asking people to take a step back and see the bigger picture. That's been kind of the theme almost in everything that you've spoken to today, is either put yourself in a position or make yourself aware, or be open in terms of the pathways that you take that allow you to get that broader perspective and operating in a wider field, which I think is, as a careers professional, I would say, yes, that's just so good to hear, because that's what we're constantly, trying to encourage people to do in terms of the way they're thinking about their careers.
Yeah, and when you're a student, we've all been there. It's very difficult to be able to sort of understand that you do have the time to take that step back, because often you're working to various deadlines and various different projects and essays and design models, whatever it might be. So you feel very so you've got a very set focus, and so actually understanding that at points just try to take that step back and go, okay, what else could I be looking at, what else could I be thinking, is something I know that myself, way back when, I didn't do it as much as I would suggest to myself now. And it's that it's opening up that learning curve and everything, and opening up that idea of theory, practice, and actual active use of these ideas, that if you do take that moment just to pause, which I think anyone in any career, just always try to do that moment of pause and think, and don't necessarily rush into something, but then similarly don't feel constrained that you can't go for something. Because, as I say, if I'd done that, the Arvon thing, I didn't think I'd get accepted as a trustee, but I thought, may as well try. The MST, exactly the same, may as well try. And often it is that perseverance is quite a useful thing, especially with architecture where it's so competitive. Understanding that you will have setbacks, you will have moments where you get rejection, and that's not a bad thing. It's unfortunately the nature of competitivity. I know that I look back at my architecture and at the time I absolutely hated having crits. It was such a stressful moment, but actually very useful to be able to build you up to the notion that you will get criticism in a helpful way in your professional careers, but also you will sometimes get pushback, rejection, and you need to be able to understand why that's needed and learn from it and adapt from it and react to it. So,
and on the subject of kind of taking your work out there, and getting rejection, CVs, applications, something that I've noticed is that there is a conflict in or a contradiction in the way people kind of talk about particularly architecture CVs, that they either need to be very beautiful objects that, in my opinion, can sometimes be quite difficult to navigate, or they can be very straightforward and let the portfolio do the talking. You're somebody who recruits. You're not necessarily I'm recruiting architects, but possibly people who've come through a similar pathway to that. What are you looking for in a CV? What would your advice be when people are making applications to your organisation or to other employers?
So I know that when I was an architecture student, especially looking for my Part 1 placement, that there's being at the Glasgow School of Art, there was very much a notion of the aesthetic. And if I looked back at my CV from then, I probably wouldn't employ myself, because it was more about the aesthetic as opposed to the content. At Arvon, I also sit on their appointments committee, and then similarly, obviously, I do a major point of the hiring at Reclesia as head of conservation, and the CVs I really appreciate are ones where I'm seeing a reflectivity. So not only I'm seeing what they've learned and what their experience is, be that in a degree or in a real world type experiences, but also the honesty behind what you might want to be learning, what you want to develop, where you think your weaknesses are. And actually that is a really useful thing for an employer, that I think a lot of CVs can be all about the aesthetic and the look how amazing I am. But if that doesn't make someone necessarily stand out, because especially with an architecture degree, everyone is pretty much on a par, and in some ways it should be the portfolio from that point of view that talks about your aesthetic. So I think I would always say focus on the content, and then if you have time and want to look at the aesthetic, then you can. But you, as you said, sometimes even then you might have fantastic content, but your aesthetic might just make it that bit more difficult to read. It doesn't need to be too flashy. I know when I was a student looking for part ones, it was a set thing that every year people did business cards and leaflet thing, and you could spend quite a lot of money when actually that wasn't really the element that would make you stand out, because everybody else was doing it. A bit like what I was saying earlier in terms of looking at engaging with different professional bodies and organizations and different opportunities, and groups. So like in my sector, engaging with a local civic society, if you're looking at wanting to be in the built heritage sector, it's those moments that can offer you a connection with people, that might be how you move into your job. But it sadly, not necessarily sadly, but sometimes it is who you know, not what you know. And that's not necessarily in a, say, an old school tie type approach, which is obviously incorrect and not helpful, but it's more in a people understanding you. If you've got a range of CVs and actually they're all the same, they've all done the same sort of degree, they've all got the same sort of, yes, different aesthetics, but they've gone for, say, the aesthetic, it's really difficult to pick apart. Whereas if there's somebody who you're like, actually, I've met them at X event where they were clearly wanting to engage and understand what I want them to be doing, suddenly they're the things that could set you apart. My current position, again, it's somebody that I know and I've known for many years before I worked for them. And it's not to say that that was therefore meant that I was always going to end up working with them. I still needed to know what I need to know, but it was just an easier way to get to that point. And it meant I was a go-to when they were looking for someone, and when it happened that I was wanting to take a move as well. So it all tied together. So the engagement and sort of putting yourself out there is often a better way to then make yourself stand out, because also on a CV, that's more content. It's showing that you're actively engaging with these things. So yeah, that would always be my sort of look back, that I know that if I looked at my CV from my part one days, I wouldn't hire myself, because it was definitely about the aesthetic rather than the content. And proofreading. I'm still terrible to this day about proofreading, but again, proofreading is always important, because it's always the last thing people think they run out of time when make the time. That's a really important element,
particularly when they talk about their attention to detail in the cover letter.
yeah.
And I guess the other thing with that is, if you can put yourself out there, attend free events, get yourself involved in a committee or an association or society or something, what you're also demonstrating is that you can actually have conversations with people and build relationships, which must be absolutely central to what you're doing. You're going out and you're working both with your craftspeople, with your clients, with other stakeholders in projects. It's about actually how you're presenting yourself. So that just the act of going and speaking to somebody,
because the architecture and built environment is a fully interdisciplinary field, and you need to be able to work collaboratively with people. I know that was a big focus of the MST, is the interdisciplinary nature and the different knowledge sets that need to be pulled into understanding of built heritage, and therefore the collaborative need of all these things. And you need to be able to talk to people and learn from people, and appreciate where they come from and their context, and similarly enable ways that you can give them your context and where you're coming from. So it is a really important thing.
And I like that, because for me that brings it straight back to the kind of the application stage, as one of the things that I'm often saying to students when they're putting an application together is, you know, can you show that you get what it is that they do? Because that's fundamentally what an application is there for, is, you know, I get this. I'm not just telling you what I can do, but I can, as you said earlier, I can see where I fit. I see where I need to be developed, but also I know why you're asking for what you're asking for.
Yeah, I know with Arvon, in our latest round of trustee appointments that we made, in the whole, we had to sift through, I think it was something like 60, 70 CVs, and then do interviews for, I think it was only sort of 10 people in the end, all for 4 trustee positions. And I know that a lot of the committee, it was often when they were reading, say, a cover letter, and it was a lot of I, rather than talking about us as Arvon, and talking about their real understanding and appreciation and why they would want to help, or why they would be able to help, and what they could bring, because it's really useful to know about a person's experience, but that should and could be in the CV. The letter should be more about the real understanding and how you would be able to engage and impart into an organization is actually the crucial element. So just having that as another area of saying, I did this, doesn't necessarily help. Which again, I think everybody, including myself, we do that at points without necessarily meaning to, because sometimes we think that that's what we're meant to be doing, to try and get something, or to try and do a position, when actually, no, flipping it around of how you'd be able to help, that is probably a better way of approaching these things.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Just to round up, have you got any kind of final words, you know, of wisdom that you want to share? I mean, I think it's been really super useful to, as I say, for me to take away that picture of, you know, kind of take that step back, try and piece as much together as you can, so you can see the context in which you're doing what you want to do. But is there anything else you'd like to add before we
I think the main thing
is
just being, really open-minded, and open to different things. I didn't set out to end up the head of conservation of a conservation practice. Again, if you told my younger self that was what I was going to do, I wouldn't necessarily have been shocked, but I wouldn't necessarily have expected it. And similarly, so I now lecture on courses for the University of Manchester and the King's Foundation. And again, I wouldn't have seen myself as not even necessarily wanting, but not even capable necessarily of having a more academic approach to my professional practice, but being open to these opportunities and open to these ideas, and developing, because you might not necessarily see yourself as an expert, but others would, kind of idea. So it is that thing where just being open-minded to different avenues, different approaches, other people's contexts that you can bring into yourself, and engaging with people. I think that is always the main thing.
Fantastic. Bill, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
No, thank you.